I want to welcome everyone today to join us as we have the Broadband Blueprint webinar. And as we kick off this thought leadership series, we are very excited as we go to the end of this year and begin a new administration, a new Congress, and as we look at the agenda for that will tremendously, I believe, transform the broadband industry. And as we go into this period of transformational change from a policy perspective, we'll have Andrew and Angie from our team that will talk about the prescriptions and the principles and the policies that we believe will best serve the country in getting connectivity to every American in every place in all parts of the country. So we're very excited. INCOMPAS, we represent all of the leading internet companies and the builders and the streamers, those that are deploying the new networks, the fiber, the fixed, the 5G, and the wireless networks that are doing so much to keep America connected during the pandemic and during COVID. We were the first association to take the pledge to keep America connected, and I'm very proud that our companies have performed so well during this crisis. As we go to the end of this year, we want to finish strong in the legislative session and to extend the CARES Act provisions that apply to broadband so that those deployments that are adopted in a number of states around the country can be extended to give it time to make sure that we get those deployments out. But as we look in a broader sense of what is to come in the next Congress, the next administration, the next FCC, I'd like to introduce Andrew to talk about INCOMPAS's Broadband Blueprint, the paper that we recently released, that we believe that sets out the principles and the guidelines, and then talk in depth of why we put this paper out and what is driving the mission and the purpose behind this policy blueprint. Andrew, welcome, and thank you for all the hard work that you've done with Angie on this paper. And we'd love to hear you outline and kind of talk through what we're trying to achieve as we advocate for broadband universal coverage and universal access and connectivity for every American.
Thanks, Chip. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today on our webinar. Just as a brief introduction, my name is Andrew Mincheff, and I work as a Government Relations Director at INCOMPAS, helping with state and local issues related to broadband deployment. At INCOMPAS, we've been really excited over the last pretty much month, and the paper's been in the works for about a year now, but we're really excited about the thought paper, and it's been well received from not only our members, but from industry as well since its release in October. The paper is titled The Broadband Blueprint, How Best to Achieve Universal Broadband Availability. And the paper was authored by our Chief Advocate and General Counsel, Angie Kronenberg. So just to provide some background, and Angie will go into some further detail on the paper, but as I mentioned, the paper really came together over the past year as the pandemic changed our lives, shifted us to a more remote kind of new normal, and also forced a lot of our policymakers at federal, state, and local levels to really evaluate the state of broadband availability and really to think about necessary solutions to bring broadband to the communities and to help Americans stay connected. So with input from our board's policy committee, our membership, as well as the INCOMPAS policy team, the paper was drafted really to help provide the blueprint with several policy recommendations and to provide a concrete plan for an outlook on a better broadband future for all Americans. So to give everyone just a brief overview and a few of the main topics that we cover with this paper, I think we focused a lot, mostly as Congress, the FCC, and state and local governments continue to consider providing additional financial support. We see from Congress opportunity of about $100 billion in federal funding available with the most recent HEROES Act for delivering broadband capable networks to local communities. So with these type of initiatives, INCOMPAS also looks at several policy considerations for funding broadband networks and specifically lays out 6 different principles for any new broadband funding. So I'll just go through each kind of briefly and provide some main points on each. So number one, the importance of adding networks and not fees. We believe any new funding for broadband should be based on equitable contributions and reflect the fact that broadband infrastructure benefits the entire economy. So any infusion of capital from Congress, the states, and localities is justifiable given the need for broadband, but really any new public support should be financed from general taxpayer funds. Number two, streamlining deployment. We believe that policymakers should adopt policies that promote transparent, fair, and reasonable cost-based rights-of-way fees, and also help streamline approval processes to help speed up, fiber builds across the country. Number three, in creating an internet for all, this funding should be targeted to areas that need it the most. So ensuring that communities that have been left behind are going to be served. Number four, we need to improve broadband data and our mapping. So determinations of any funding or support that's needed to deploy broadband should be focused and based on reliable data and verifiable maps. Number five is regarding the playing field and any growing competition for funding, that reverse auction should be embraced more efficiently and effectively to help close the broadband availability gap. And then finally, number six is future-proof networks. Here, we believe that the FCC should explicitly allow impacted wireless providers to use reimbursement funds to future-proof their networks by purchasing Open RAN networks and equipment. We believe, with the recent findings by the FCC that replacing certain Chinese-made equipment will cost at least $1.84 billion. And the moment really provides a critical opportunity here to help secure and widen our mobile networks, the supply chain, through a more cost-effective Open RAN model. So moving forward, our paper, and by introducing these ideas for achieving universal broadband availability in the US, we're really hoping to build a greater coalition behind the effort. And the last few weeks, we've been really reaching out to different, not only our membership, industry associations, but as well as consumer and public interest groups, and also governor offices to help build that connection to the state and local level. So if you haven't already, we definitely encourage you to please read our paper. You can find it on our website as well as our social media pages. And we really appreciate any of the support in sharing or distributing our paper to help really benefit informing and educating federal, state, and local policymakers as they begin to look at their budgets for funding, as well as any new legislative proposals for streamlining. So as part of the webinar, again, we're happy to answer any questions and get into further details on the paper, but I want to turn it over to Angie now to kind of go into further detail on connectivity issues that we face in this country, some policy priorities that we could see in the next year, as well as her role and vision for writing the paper. So Angie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Andrew, and thanks, Chip, also for leading the conversation. I would just want to take a moment to ask our attendees, if you have a question you want to ask us, you can use the Q&A chat. Andrew is going to be keeping an eye on that while I'm talking, but we would love to, have your input sooner rather than later. Of course, once you've heard the entire presentation, we'd be happy to take your questions at the end too. Encourage you to use that Q&A chat line. As Chip and Andrew were talking, these are really wonderful opportunity to kind of hear high level what the paper is about, what our members are doing. But I thought I would take just a moment to talk about what the problems are and why it is that we are looking at these issues in particular to address these problems. So in the United States, we really do have a significant connectivity problem. The FCC data, which at this time we think is likely understated, shows a lack of home broadband network access to about 15 million Americans. So this is, a very basic, do they have a network that can deliver a broadband connection to them in their homes? And the FCC's mapping information indicates that at least 15 million Americans don't have that right now. Other data shows that it may even be a much greater divide in terms of how many consumers can actually use broadband. And such data has gone up to as high as 162 million Americans. So that kind of data potentially captures where there's lack of network access, but also where there's lack of opportunity for consumers to connect for other reasons, such as perhaps they can't afford it, or they don't have the devices that would allow them to connect to it. So that's really concerning, right? That we have potentially that many Americans who don't have network access or not otherwise using broadband. And this has become really highlighted during the COVID pandemic, as we've seen a number of local jurisdictions who have needed to encourage work from home, school from home, a hybrid of those things, as the pandemic has affected certain areas more than others. This also, of course, impacts the ability of consumers to access the types of services and content that's delivered besides just the connectivity to school and the connectivity to work, such as telehealth applications and seeing a doctor online, which can be very critical when we're asking people to limit their movement and exposure to COVID areas. In terms of the economic recovery that is needed related to the COVID-19 pandemic, small businesses have relied significantly on broadband connectivity. Of course, when they're trying to run their small business out of their homes, or their workers are having to work from home, having that broadband connectivity so they can continue to fulfill the orders and services of their customers is really critical. And then, of course, we have seen significant reliance on activities such as the one we're doing now through Zoom, streaming services that are delivering video to consumers, entertainment video during COVID, since people can't go to the movies and they can't go, see live plays in theater. That's important. And then we've seen significant cloud revolution even before the pandemic, but that has increased as you have more online activity happening in the US to support the national and the local economy during COVID. So while the US has really spent a significant part of the last decade trying to address the connectivity issues, it's really been highlighted during the COVID pandemic why it is critical now for policymakers to look at what we can do to address the connectivity gaps. Our paper is focused on the network connectivity. In other words, what needs to be done to ensure that every consumer has broadband connectivity in their home, and every business that needs broadband connectivity can get access to it. Of course, we're the competition association, INCOMPAS. We want to be sure that our members have an opportunity to build network, and they're building the fiber and fixed wireless, the fast networks that support both the connectivity in the home, as well as the new 5G networks of the connectivity on the go for so many consumers. We've offered a number of solutions in our paper that we think is just important for policymakers to be looking at as they address the connectivity issues. For example, we support funding from the federal government, but we also encourage state governments to get involved and to use this as an opportunity to fund exactly where network connectivity is needed. Well, how do we do that? How do we ensure that funding is going to where it's needed the most, i.e. where there's no networks today? Congress has recognized this, and they passed the Broadband Data Act earlier this year. The Federal Communications Commission is currently implementing that Broadband Data Act to ensure that they can assess accurately where consumers have that connectivity and where they don't. So our paper encourages for the commission to complete its implementation of the Broadband Data Act and get those broadband maps done so we know where funding needs to go. Then secondarily, we're also encouraging cities, towns that need that connectivity to work with providers on streamlined processes to ensure that those providers can get access to the permitting that's needed, and so that they can build their infrastructure as quickly as possible. We think that it's really critical that cities and states work on rights-of-way fees as well, ensuring that those fees are based upon an assessment of their cost to maintain those rights-of-way and to keep those fees low as possible to encourage more deployment, and that they do so on a non-discriminatory basis. In other words, the fees should be charged to both incumbents and competitors at a very similar rate. Another aspect of connectivity is about how we reach consumers no matter where they are. Into a multi-tenant environment. So 30% of Americans are living in an apartment or a condo, and in order to encourage network deployment to those types of buildings, we need access to those buildings. So we've had a call to action for both industry and policymakers at the federal, the state, and the cities to come together to work on these issues together to ensure that consumers who do not have access today can obtain that access to a network provider, and also to promote and enable competitors to reach more consumers quickly. So what we've learned from this is that when the industry and the policymakers come together to set forth a framework in terms of access, as well as to provide for that funding in a way that is fair and equitable, we can really make a difference. It's just key that we continue the conversations together and that we promote the opportunities to further educate policymakers across the board about what's working and what doesn't work. I'm happy, as I mentioned at the beginning, to take any questions folks have about certain aspects of the paper. But I thought it may be helpful if we move into next to the conversation about why it is that we need robust broadband networks to bring that, bring all the online services, the cloud revolution, the streaming revolution, all of the online economy to every consumer. So Chip, we talked a little bit about this on our webinar last week, but do you want to provide us some additional context for why fiber and the densification of fiber is so important, not just for home connectivity, but for mobile connectivity and the 5G infrastructure?
Yes, and I'd like to kind of step back and give a little broader historical context of where we are in the present. So INCOMPAS started 40 years ago, the birth of competition, and it was around long distance competition and the long distance networks. And at that time, all of our networks were and policies were monopoly and were copper legacy networks. As soon as competition started in the 1980s, you had all of those long distance networks transformed to fiber or to move from copper to fiber. And when that happened, it created the internet backbones that led to the digital revolution and really showed that competition policy is the best way to spur and drive innovation and investment. And that happened both then in the local markets, in cable and in wireless. And what we're seeing today really is the golden age of fiber deployment and fiber investment. And to give Angie's question an answer, we're going through a period of time where the wireless or the mobile networks really will be on a foundation of fiber-rich, fiber-dense networks. And most of the network will be fiber. And then whether it's a small cell or a fixed wireless or traditional macro, they will all be connecting back into a fiber network as quickly as possible to be able to get the 10 to 100 times greater speed and capacity of what is defined as 5G. From a larger international context, we're now in a great power rivalry with China. And so the race to be the first to 5G really is now dependent on being able to quickly deploy fiber. And so removing the barriers to fiber deployment, whether it is right of way or poles or conduits or multi-tenant apartments, being able to speed deployments of fiber helps us internationally win the race to 5G against China. And then all of the wireless mobility will be built on top of that fiber foundation. Second, as we move to an economy where everything is network driven, network dependent, the Internet of Things and the economy, the commerce, the manufacturing, the robotics, the artificial intelligence, the autonomous vehicles, the precision agriculture, the telemedicine, the remote classroom, and the remote business, everything will be driven by how robust our networks are. And so this has given us, for the first time in my 30 years of public policy, a national consensus and a national commitment to bring connectivity to every American in every place. This new national consensus is reflected in a broadband bill introduced by the whip of the House, Jim Clyburn, who's a good friend and family friend of both Angie and me, but his leadership, not only in President Biden's presidential campaign, his leadership in Congress, and the fact that he was the lead author of this, indicates as we go into the next Congress that we will see strong leadership from both the administration and from the House, and we believe in the Senate as well, where Republicans like Jeb Bush, like Roger Wicker, like many others, are saying that we need rural America and all of America, rural and urban, connected. So this national consensus out of COVID and the international competitiveness and the race with China on 5G now brings everything in alignment and convergence to see funds, federal funding that we've never seen in our lifetime to this effort, similar to what the country did coming out of the Depression to then bring electricity to every American. I now believe that we'll do the same thing for broadband connectivity. And so our opportunity for our member companies and everyone that's on this webinar to have an influence on the parameters and the principles of these new funding initiatives, whether it's in Congress or the FCC, whether it's through E-rate, telemedicine, or Connect America, the rural agriculture funding and programs. There's going to be a whole, and from states and localities. So you'll have every stakeholder in the country trying to find a way to connect their citizens, their community, their businesses to the fastest, highest capacity network. We're calling for a 1 gigabit service by 2025. We're the first association to call for that to be the national standard. We're very proud of that. We believe it is the moonshot that is both doable and achievable, but necessary for us to win the race and connect every American and close the digital divide. So that the stars are aligned, the congressional powers are in position. The new administration and the new start, I think, will give the first 6 months of the new administration a real focus where this will be the bipartisan consensus and action, both at the FCC and in Congress, to have major broadband funding and policy and streamlining. And we hope the deployment agenda that we've been fighting for over the last few years, a chance to become reality. So
we did have a question in the chat that I thought we should address, and it came from Ross, and Ross said, you know, what role do resellers have in this ecosystem? And I want to address it this way. What we see at INCOMPAS is that when you have multiple new networks that are being built, it really drives the opportunity for those network providers to offer wholesale connectivity to resellers. So we think that it is really key that these underlying policies that we're discussing, it does lead to a healthier wholesale market, which then leads to a healthier retail market. Why is that good? It's good because it drives better customer service, and it usually drives better pricing ultimately for the retail customers. And as we talked about this larger ecosystem of new networks being built across the country in many different types of situations, as you see more online activity, it provides a whole new opportunity for many kinds of software companies to succeed online and offering services over the top to customers, whether it's consumers themselves or it's small businesses and medium-sized businesses. So we do see these underlying policies as key to ensuring opportunities for resellers. I hope I answered your question, Ross. Did anybody else have any other questions that they wanted to put into the chat? I'd encourage you to do so. And then Andrew, do you have any further input on our goals in the paper, the outreach efforts that we're undertaking to local and state policymakers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think moving forward, what we see now and what we'll be seeing in the next few months is that a lot of state governments as well as local municipal are kind of tight on revenues and budgets, and they're really looking for any ways of raising fees. So I think a common challenge for a lot of our members and a lot of their product going out to try to provide these networks to the communities is, the rates that they face and the rising costs. So, as long as, we are listening to them, helping them, kind of weather the storm, but I think getting aware of that issue, educating the governments about how it's going to impact not only, people who are in need of the internet service, but as well as these businesses who are trying to get to these areas. So I think it all takes an outreach approach, listening from our membership, as well as being able to work with associations that are representing state and local governments. I was fortunate to be part of a BDAC, which is the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, and we were working on a COVID report over the last few months, and it brought together a lot of different people from private sector to state and local government, as well as the tribal communities. So hearing each kind of share their insights, what they're facing, allowed us to create a report that brought together best practices. And I think moving forward, action like this, of hearing out each side and being able to kind of see what works, what doesn't work, I think goes a long way. And moving forward with a lot of our state and local governments tight on revenues, we can try to find these solutions that I think everyone wins. And that'll be the main challenge, I think, moving forward and on broadband deployment.
We have a couple more questions that I wanted to take from the chat. So Ellen is asking, do we have concerns or thoughts about reverse auctions as compared to grants, such as in the CARES Act? Do we think reverse auctions essentially could be a blunt instrument in that they don't necessarily meet an individual community's needs as compared to grant situations? So we've seen, as you mentioned, we've seen both approaches. And I think that we're encouraging that the government explore different opportunities. We have members that are participating. We've had members participate in the CAF reverse auction who have done so very successfully and have been able to meet their consumer needs in areas that were adjacent to areas that they're already in. And that's been really an exciting opportunity for them. And they have begun the process of participating in the RDOF auction that is underway at the FCC right now for additional opportunity to expand their networks to unserved communities and areas. So that's really exciting. But Ellen, we also have members who are receiving money through CARES Act grants, and that they are building and able to meet the needs of unserved communities. In fact, we've been working in Congress during the lame duck session on potential extensions of time for that CARES Act funding so they can continue to use that money even into 2021 to meet those needs. And as I was saying in my earlier conversation, it's really important that they be able to do so because they're able to bring on new consumers and small businesses to achieve that connectivity in situations where they didn't have anything. So we see both as opportunities, not necessarily one's better than the other, but that potentially they can both go to meet the needs of communities. And we also had another question coming in from one of our members, Jeff Buckingham, and he's asking, Andrew, what should we all be doing to support this effort? And Chip, if you have some insight, but Andrew's been leading our educational effort. So what should our members be doing?
No, well, one thing is, obviously with our paper and being able to send it out to our membership is really to encourage our members to not only share it within their own companies, to provide employees and their own executives kind of a good understanding on what's happening in not only DC, but around the country, but also encourage them to share it with their leaders, their policy leaders at the state and local level. I think that creates really the connection first to not only establish relationships that fundamentally help you build your business, help build that network, but then further on, can help reach agreement on issues, whether it's the different rights of way, fees, taxes. It really starts that conversation. So we definitely encourage not only our members, but whoever's involved on broadband deployments to really look at our paper, help use it as a guide, and to help share it with others in the communities, and really kind of build from that and create those relationships.
And let me just add to what Andrew said. So if we have members all across the country and every type of market, really reach out to your member of Congress and begin now before you go into the next congressional session. And if you could have a meeting where you actually demonstrated your broadband deployments and connectivity in the communities where you serve and where the members of Congress, whether House or Senate, where they represent, so that you can show them these are the businesses we serve, these are the schools, these are the hospitals, these are the families and the residences that we serve, and this is what we're going to need to expand this to every part of the community and every part of the state that you serve in. And these are the types of policies, not only on the funding side, but we need to be able to streamline and remove barriers. So begin those conversations, have those relationships. I think every member of Congress today, if he can be on the side of the builders of broadband networks, that's a very good place to be. And what we're seeing is when a competitor enters into a market, prices drop, speeds increase, service gets better from incumbent and competitor alike. So tell that part of the story, because we're going to be asking for competition policy in every program. So if it's E-rate, we want it to be competitive, the competitive bid process. If it's RDOF and USF, we want that to be competitive. If it's telehealth and telemedicine, if there's a new infrastructure bill, we want to make sure that everything is driven by competitive principles and why that's so important. And the third thing that I would recommend, find a community that really does permitting and really works with you in a good way, and hold it up as a model, because whatever is to come, we're going to have to find a way to make peace and have cooperation and collaboration with the cities and the counties and the municipalities. They'll need resources. The builders, the companies that we represent are going to need the reasonable timeliness, the reasonableness of fees, the reasonableness of working and collaborating together. So find good models to hold up of where you're working with localities in a good, productive, constructive way, so that members of Congress can see what works and what doesn't as it relates to building the network. So begin engaging now, tell your story, build the relationship. And then when we have our policy summit in the first 100 days of the next administration, which is going to be February 8th through the 10th, we'll continue to tell those stories in Washington and virtually. And we'll have key members of Congress, key members of the FCC listening, and their staffs and participating in the policy summit. So right now, as many times as we can repeat our story, repeat the principles, and repeat the good models, that is what we really would encourage all of those listening to our webinar, and what we'll be telling all of our coalition members and the people working on this initiative to be doing.
Great, thanks, Chip. We have another question that Jason submitted. Do you think that regional MPOs or economic development authorities could be empowered on these issues in a way that allows them to offer solutions for an entire area, whether it's urban or rural or suburban? What are your thoughts about that?
You know, I do think that especially the states are going to be doing broadband initiatives, and depending upon how Congress allocates the money and who administers the funding, but regional economic development authorities and state economic development authorities are realizing that the critical essential infrastructure is broadband. And whether it is I'll give you an example. There'll be a new Amazon distribution center right outside of Jackson, and they'll have 1,000 people working there. They'll need fiber, they'll need Wi-Fi, and they'll also have robotics in their distribution system. So you have to have really robust 5G type connectivity for that distribution center to function. That's going to have a tremendous economic development for the entire central region of Mississippi. And they'll have clusters that will then, of other distribution centers that will develop, and other advanced manufacturing, and the deployment of networks connecting all of that really will have a multiplier effect. And so if you look at economic development, that's just one example in my home state and close to me, but it really will drive probably not only greater fiber deployment, greater wireless deployment, probably a major data center deployment. And then you have Nissan just down the street that is manufacturing cars. And as they look at autonomous vehicles, then the networks that will allow autonomous vehicles, or just over into the next region of the state, precision agriculture. So every time you have a major network investment that makes one big economic development project work, it then ripples out across, excuse me, all different types of sectors of the, of the economy. So I got too excited there. I got choked up.
Thanks, Chip. So we also have been asked to revisit the reseller question. What specific ways can resellers enter into this mix in a more nuanced way? And Andrew, Chip, do you have any advice for us?
I do have for example, so we have a dish, a C Spire, a Granite. So that I think finding our member companies where you can do a partnership to resell their service is, and whether that is a fiber MVNO or a reseller in the business space. I think having those partners where you can resell their services as they build and deploy and enter new markets, those strategic alliances and partnerships will be very critical to a lot of our different member companies. So that's just one thought off the top of my head.
Yeah, and that's that natural connectivity that comes of being a member of an association, right? As you meet other members and hear about their businesses, and you learn that there are opportunities to partner together, is really fantastic. We've seen lots of success stories of members coming together as a result of their work in the association. So we encourage you to do that. And Ross, we'd be happy to chat with you after this webinar more about those kinds of opportunities.
We have a lot of
the association.
Yes, and we have a lot of small member companies who are partnering with our mid and large size companies on a regional and a local basis.
Yeah, and we do have the opportunity as you're working on having the conversations with policymakers, to receive talking points from us. I mean, obviously our white paper that we're talking about today is available on our website. You can download it, you can share links, use social media, to spread the word about it. And that's a great way to talk about what's needed in the industry from local and state policymakers to ensure there's more robust connectivity and competitive connectivity throughout the United States. So I encourage you, Ross, to take a look at that and use that. That we'd be happy to talk more offline. All right, well, I think, let me just go chat. I was on the chat line, Q&A line. Oh, we did have a comment from one of our members in the chat line that I wanted to pass along, Chip. So Fletcher's advice to resellers is, work on the policy too about having municipal networks be open and available through wholesale deals. So that is like a really important, there's been a lot of activity on the muni side. And there's been, significant support for munis to be doing more to invest in broadband. And so as they do so, making sure that they have wholesale opportunities to create more competitive alternatives, but also resell arrangements with third-party providers is helpful. Okay, I think we maybe covered all the questions.
Hey, Angie, just a question to you.
Chat line, yeah.
On kind of priorities moving forward for INCOMPAS and kind of our goals to the next year as we see a new administration and at the FCC, also kind of the power changing positions there at new chair and a few new commissioners. So kind of if you can speak a little bit. So you see broadband being on the agenda as well as
yes.
the new administration too.
I think it's gonna be really critical. So, and apologies for those who maybe heard us talk about this already, what the transition will be like. So excuse me as I repeat myself. But what typically happens with the new administration at the FCC is that the president will decide who the chair will be. If he chooses from among the sitting commissioners, then the full chairmanship, goes to that person and there's no additional Senate confirmation required. That remains to be seen whether he chooses one of the current sitting Democratic commissioners to be full chair. If he does not, then he will pick one of them to be acting chair. The norm is to pick the senior person. So in this instance, that would be Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel. And she has been very outspoken about the need for the commission to use the tools in their tool chest today to address COVID needs. She's talked specifically about the ability of the commission to find that the E-rate funding can be used to support connectivity to students and teachers at home who do not have that connectivity today. So I could potentially see her want to address that if we do not see Congress address it specifically through another round of COVID relief. Now, that said, they very well could. The Democrats in the House have passed a $12 billion funding opportunity for teachers and students at home for all of 2021. And that has not passed the Senate, but it has been passed in the House. So potentially that could be new funding that then the current FCC would need to address. I also think that they could do more on lifeline funding to address low-income consumers. So this may be the situation where there's not a student in the home or a teacher in the home, but they still need broadband connectivity and they just can't afford it. So what can be done to stretch the lifeline dollars to do more to connect those kinds of consumers? So those are two things top of mind that I think an acting chair, Rosenworcel, is likely to be looking at. And then, of course, as I mentioned, should there be any new funding, like an infrastructure package, for instance, that Chip referenced, the Internet for All Act being passed by the whole Congress and signed by the president, which was the Clyburn legislation. If we see something like that, that intends to have an FCC role which would be fairly significant in both the distribution on the deployment network side, as well as distribution on the subscription side to get more people connected vis-a-vis affordability. So that would be, that would probably be all hands on deck effort at the FCC. It'd be a fairly significant opportunity for the FCC to make a difference if something like that does pass. The transformational piece that Chip refers to, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Did I answer your question, Andrew? Or did you have?
Yeah, that's great. No, thank you.
One of our member companies did research on all of the different broadband funding mechanisms, E-rate, telemedicine, RDOF, mobility fund, and not even including the broadband bill that is proposed, the HEROES Act by Jim Clyburn in the House. We're looking at about $165 billion of federal funding over the next 10 years. If we also have the major infrastructure bill passed in the first 100 days or the first 6 months of Congress, the infusion of federal funding combined with the private investment and what we're seeing in the multiples in the merger and acquisition space right now, and the need to deploy these advanced networks everywhere, I just think the next 3 to 5 years is going to be, truly, and I don't want to overuse the word transformational, but it really will be. And this is a realistic, reasonable, achievable goal to see both the deployment agenda where we make deployment faster, more economic, and work collaboratively with our municipalities and localities. But the funding from private and federal funding sources will be available. This will be doable. We just want to make sure that your voice is at the table, and we continue to see all of these programs administered in a competitively neutral, competitively driven manner. And I believe that those are things that we can build a great coalition around and a consensus for the country to be able to achieve the connectivity goals that we've laid out in this paper.
That's
Great point.
I actually think that's a really great final word. I was going back to the chat line and the Q&A to make sure we covered everything. I think we did. Any closing thoughts, Andrew, Chip, before we say goodbye?
No,
Well,
I just want to thank you and Andrew both for the great work and putting the blueprint together. It does give us the thought piece and the principles to now build from as we do the advocacy work ahead of us.
Well, I did the writing, but I can't take all the credit because I did a lot of work with our member companies. Our policy chair, Jeff Stronkowski, deserves a big thank you, along with a number of our member companies that sit on the policy committee. Microsoft also contributed, Netflix contributed, and then a number of our other fiber company members, First Light Fiber, who chairs our board. Both Kurt and Jill were fantastic as I was working through all the principles and putting all the language together. And then of course we hired Andrew beginning of the year to really help with the distribution of the paper and the educational pieces of the paper. So really just want to thank him because he's just done a tremendous job since we released the paper, getting us prepared to release the paper, and then since the release of the paper. And so I'm pretty excited that it's finally seen the light of day and that it's coming upon really significant changes in the administration and the potential opportunity for a lot of funding that could then meet, the needs of Americans and businesses.
And let me just emphasize that Andrew's responsibility and role on the INCOMPAS team is to really help us extend our advocacy at the state and local level. So not only at the federal, congressional, and the FCC, but to really help our companies as they go state by state, town by town, county by county. And so we look forward to teaming with our member companies and coalitions on the local and state level, as well as on the federal level.
And if you're interested in learning more about what INCOMPAS can do for your company, I would recommend that you reach out to one of us. Julia Strout on our team handles all the member relations. So if you have her contact information, you can just reach out to her directly as well. We've been growing the association. It's been a really exciting year for us this year. We look forward to that continued growth, and we really do want to make sure that what we're doing for the industry can help as many as possible. So if you join our association, you will have a seat at the table and help drive the right messaging to policymakers and ensure the opportunities for industry to best meet consumer and business needs. So thanks, everybody. Really happy that you joined us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And credit to Jeff Sharp as well for our press push and social media presence. So
yes, thank you, Andrew.
A little bit of credit, and it's been great to work on. And Angie, credit to you as well for all your hard work on it.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving.